Green Gulch. The talk of my presentation is called The Earthly Bodhisattva at Green Gulch. This is a part of the book on American organic farming literature and culture that I have been working on, and I'm very excited to share with you today. So I want to begin with two epitaphs. The first one is called, it's from Wendy Johnson, the gardener and author I'm dealing with today, I'm talking about today. She says, Zen practice was a field action for me, never a safe haven from the world. And that's from her book. And the second one is called, it's from ancient China. It's called Ordinary Hermits Retreat to the Hills and Marshes. Great Hermits Retreat to the Court and Marketplace. So with basically these two epithets, I'm interested in challenging or understand in a way spirituality or Zen or all kinds of religion, how they participate in the world, and if they are really elitists or retreat who doesn't care about anything that's going on in the world. So winter solstice 1979, approximately 8 years after initiating two other landmark gardens in California and Virginia, the cancer-ravaged Alan Chadwick was welcomed back to Green Gulch Farm, a Zendo garden farm near Muir Beach in Marin County, California, that he had earlier helped establish, but eventually left behind because of its apparent inaction. Chadwick's frustration with these daily 2-hour morning, dawn, and evening sitting meditations, doing nothing, is best captured by Green Gulch head gardener Wendy Johnson's recollection of his self-righteous anger. In her vividly well-wrought Zen Georgic book, Gardening at the Dragon's Gate, At Work in the Wild and Cultivated World, she recalled Chadwick's moments of outrage that she had come to embrace affectionately as expressions of her beloved mentor, of her beloved mentor's prophetic rage, didactic style, and everyday impatience. Amid her pragmatic advice on mindful Zen gardening and tactics of organic farming, she writes, Ellen hung murdered birds at the entrance gate to our peaceful Zen meditation center as a macabre and ominous warning to all transgressors of the true garden way. He wailed at top volume each time the wooden sounding block was struck from meditation, and faithful Zen students mindfully put down their tools and headed calmly for meditation hall. Look at this, Ellen ranted and ceased. Perfectly able-bodied young men and women, running to atavistic sound of wood beating on wood, running without shame, and leaving an old man like me to work alone in the garden. Here, Johnson's memory of caring for the singular Chadwick, as well as attending his weekly deathbed gardening lectures, was deeply personal and telling. For this intimate moment of revelation also stood as a crude caricature of the common sense understanding of Zen as a world-denying asceticism and evasion. Navel-gazing in action, switch-flipping enlightenment, and bliss-out emptiness, these unsubstantiated urban legends of Zen, reflected in Chadwick's rebuke, would challenge farmers and gardeners' spiritual pursuit of the organic as a radical form of political resistance and social care. Wendy Johnson's path to becoming a politically engaged organic farmer at first shared the prototype beat trajectory of various post-war countercultural American youth. In Gardening at the Dragon's Gate, Johnson reflected on this border-crossing journey going on the road from her hometown in Westport, Connecticut, across the Atlantic to Israel. Her initial quest for spiritual and intellectual liberation across continents, as captured in her spiritual autobiography, enacted the quintessential American cultural ritual of hometown escape, self-transformation, and creative becoming as life-shattering act of conversion and growth. At Jerusalem's Hebrew University, she first chose to study comparative religion as her graduate major. She later enlisted in Hatha Yoga and was invited to practice seated meditation, Zazen, as the historic Mount of Olives. In a solitary zendo overlooking the Judean desert and the Dead Sea, she repeatedly sat in silence above the burgeoning Middle Eastern conflict and memorable sights of the human non-human sublime. In Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, Johnson had doubtlessly indulged in her expatriate status as an affluent political activist who took flight from an American domesticity and conformity, being torn apart and transformed. Her seclusion upon the hill in Edward Said's sense of the Orient as difference, amid to tease out the privileged hippie Orientalism as a mode of social change and othering. As she later articulates, I consider myself a political activist and a rabid protector of the natural world, not a meditator. Prior to her spiritual conversion to Zen Buddhism, she had maintained the commonplace misconception that meditation often retains aspects of a religious retreat and dogmatism, and thus eschews political activism and pragmatic action. Paradoxically, it was also her gardening attentiveness and life-changing turn to Zen that propelled her to the self-critical epiphany that, other than meditating on tactics of relieving everyday suffering, she had been running away from her life as an American. Johnson's ultimate return to West Coast America and residency at the Tassajara Zen Mountain Center at Big Sur and the Green Gulch Farm of the San Francisco Zen Center witnessed and developed the emergence of organic Zen farming and gardening across decades in the U.S. As she revealed in the chapter, Valley of Their Ancestors, her embodied path to the Buddha way was destined to be unconventional, original, and expressively countercultural American from the outset. In 1971, Johnson had learned about Shinryu Suzuki's Zen mind and beginner's mind during a 7-day silent sitting meditation, that is Zazen, in a Trappist monastery in Israel from Sona Nakagawa. At the height of the Vietnam War, she was still an American youth, reflecting the global search for spiritual and political alternatives to the surging of post-war U.S. consumerism, U.S. consumerism at home and colonial powers abroad. Welcoming Suzuki's wisdom and the practice of non-dualistic original mind, however, she held a flexible, bold, and curiosity-driven openness that would change her lifelong beliefs and domestic practices. In effect, she captured the open, empty, but ready mind that Suzuki realized had been fading into hollow ritual practices and sectarian debates in the Far East and in his Japan. These pioneer boundary transgression history of her Zen and gardening teachers would prompt her to inspect her own experience of a broader crossing conversion to Zen Buddhism. Under the influence of Suzuki, she pondered her status as a white American living in Israel and California, rather than submitting to formality and, quote, walking around in black robes, bowing to everyone, and chanting lustily in Japanese, unquote, she had reflected on, quote, what the American face of Zen Buddhism might look like, unquote, as a pragmatic contemporary embodiment. For her, this turn, both inward and outward, was to become consequential not just for herself, but for the world. in a world where the Bodhisattva compassion of gardening and everyday life at Green Gulch. A similar struggle that had haunted Johnson since her days in Israel. What would active political engagement mean for religious meditators compassionate about those who were suffering from the war outside in Vietnam and inside within themselves? At Tassajara, now considered the oldest Zen monastery outside Asia, she first began bridging the perplexing ground between meditation and political activism with the encouragement of Suzuki's heir, Richard Baker, whom she nicknamed a product of the Berkeley free speech movement and of radical discontent. From the agricultural and cultural tactics of Chadwick and Harry Roberts, whom she learned to develop local practical skills of agriculture and self-culture. She fostered an ongoing ethos of productivity, beauty, and inspiration through gardening at Green Gulch. She experimented with everyday practices. She experimented with everyday practices to forge possible links between spirituality and activism. Her path to a more socially engaged lay life outside the comfort and protection of Green Gulch was further driven by the notoriety of San Francisco Zen Center and its late sexual scandal with Baker during the 1980s. Having walked with Thich Nhat Hanh in silent meditation during an international peace march in New York City in 1982, Johnson eventually undertook to engage Buddhist teaching on interbeing. She writes, "At Green Gulch, he taught us outdoor walking meditation, and he taught the gift of taking our practice out of the meditation hall and into the streets, the wards of prisons and hospitals, and into the corridors of corporate America. When I first met him, he asked me if there could be a Zen center without Zen and without a center. Too many people distinguish between the inner of our mind and the world outside," he said. "But these worlds are not separate. They belong to the same reality." Interbeing, the loose translation of the Vietnamese phrase Tiep Hien, is the term adapted by Thich Nhat Hanh from the Buddhist classic Avatamsaka Sutra during the height of the Vietnam War. It was an essential part of his lifelong commitment to consolidate Buddhism morality along with social concerns. Tiep, as Thich Nhat Hanh explains, meant, quote, being in touch with the wonders and sufferings of the world, and Hien means realizing the reality of the world and the mind through understanding and compassion, making it here and now. As a fundamental precept of what Thich Nhat Hanh coined in the 1950s as engaged Buddhism, Tiep Hien sought the integration of Buddhist teaching and practices into an everyday reality marred by colonialism, inequality, environmental collapse, and other contemporary social political circumstances. With a leftist critical positioning, Tiep Hien was a distinct extension of the 1930s Asian Buddhist reform that vernacularized monasticism and subject transcendence. It endeavored to bring Buddhism to every moment of our daily lives, whether when one brushes teeth, drives cars, or walks in supermarkets. Rather than annihilating or putting that inner world of the green thought towards that external world of green shade cherished by British poets such as Andrew Marvell, Tiep Hien, or interbeing, embraces the non-duality of prayer and labor, individual suffering with social structural injustice, as well as community building and political resistance. Whereas Christian Heinz garden imagining long center around the image of a solitary Adam cultivating his mind and soul in a fallen Eden of erotic seduction and retreat, interbeing helped to substantiate Johnson's divergence from such highly charged and bounded metaphoric garden of philosophical tropes and Platonic transcendence. From Tassajara and Green Gulch's meditation hall, she and allies built an organic farm-to-table nexus that has continued to supply and inspire farmer chefs and communities of the larger San Francisco Bay Area vicinity. This includes publishing cookbooks and recipes, initiating farmers markets, garden-to-plate food banks, and low-income neighborhood garden, as well as instructing children and communities how to, quote, grow beautiful organic food and cooking them with love and intention, unquote. In this sense, Johnson's ethos and tactics of pragmatic and political gardening redirected the very experience of gardens outward towards not only physical engagement with the material world, but also active participation in the cultivation of a social ecological world of sustainable consumption and production. In this enclosed and protected Zendo Garden Farm, the quest for what Andrew Marvell's metaphysical poem, The Garden, calls green thought in a green shade, no longer serve as the ultimate touchstone of one's projected inner self-being. Neither has it risen beyond nature into what Robert Harrison noted as the radiance of the phenomenon as such. Rather, the fleeting transience of earthly existence that Buddhism has termed nothingness further prompts solidarity with others through pragmatic compassion. Building on Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, Johnson has transfigured Chadwick's organic ethos of interconnected beatitude beyond the refined care and pleasure of organic self-gardening. In the late evening stroll, Johnson, like the moonlight fishing Thoreau at Walden Pond, recounted a seemingly disoriented but in fact heightened sense of attention that engages the self in a paradoxical but expanded everydayness of the here and now. She remarked on this practice of bare noting. The garden helps me stretch my attention and extend myself toward what I may not always notice or even want to see, especially if I'm hurried. Attention is active, moving deliberately. It settles on its object while keeping a wide view. In order to cultivate a mind that is stable, deliberate, and inclusive, and in order to see into the heart of the green world, a naked, unobstructed attention to what is right here is required. A practice from the time of Buddha known as bare noting advocate just such as an active attention, the foundation of mindful awareness. Deep space, slow time, mindful attention to one's full presence through most essentially concentrating on one's breath facilitates the here and now as vehicles of interconnecting with the inner self and the larger human and non-human community. In such moments of interbeing, one realizes that mountains are walking, all the land is alive and changing, and trees are planted and pruned for future generations. Each moment emanates not as an isolated fragment of independence, but entangled relations of becoming where hungry humans and insects both feed and are fed. Just like the California earthquake landscape in constant motion, Johnson maintained that not even a single moment in the garden is reiterated and permanent. The fractured San Andreas fault line, as she illuminates, amplifies the indelible and evolving signature of its home soil and garden, and hence offers a Zen Buddhist notion insight into the impermanent but possibility-filled world we dwell in. Digging into the bedrock of one's garden, she suggested, prompts learning from your mistake as well as from your success, becoming familiar with and learning to love and depend on many beings who have work and soil. You now soil the garden you now inherit to garden, and getting familiar with the contradictions in your own character and nature. Bare noting of one's existence in each moment as pulsations within the broad geological and historical frame means to see beyond the appearances of higher and lower and into contradictions and mistakes and patterns. She remarked, "True moral presence in the garden gives room to experimentation, risk, and strong lessons from danger and failure." Like an experienced organic gardener whom farmed with a heightened and expanded sense of space and time, a mindful gardener creates consequential relationship and into fresh connections. He or she cultivates beyond fleeting minutes and provinciality and is determined to make decisions and choices. Vast emptiness, nothing holy, suggested the legendary founder of Chinese Zen Buddhism in 6th century. Rather than pursuing personal salvation and worldliness as means to the salvation of the lone soul, Johnson seeks an enlightenment that radically embraces the return to the infinite simplicity and ordinariness of everydayness as what is sacred ground of holiness. Interbeing in deep space and time generates no nihilistic mysticism of the self, but becomes a place and community building tactic that can empower through humbling and compassionate practices. What Johnson and fellow apprentices at Green Gulch reconfigured was a Zendo garden farm whose pragmatic doing and pastoral delight redefined the existential emptiness and repressed Freudian pleasure of the Western garden in the mind. Deeply entrenched in the worldliness of the bodily, the material, and the everyday, Johnson generated an organic Zen Buddhist synergy that embodied not only the pragmatic consequences of Suzuki's emptiness, but also Thich Nhat Hanh's practice of a socially engaged meditation in and as miracle on earth. Such practice of spiritual and political embodiment vividly exemplified the boundless virgin soil of the US world and mind, but also reconfigured an influential ethos of Zen gardening as a pragmatic embodiment for self and community, daily life, and the planet. Johnson's Zen Georgia work brought forth the Vietnamese American extension of pragmatism that reminded, through deep space and deep time, humanity's power and responsibility to take right action in the world. I'm making my conclusion here in two short paragraphs. On a hilltop of Green Gulch overlooking Muir Beach stand the grave of organic prophet Alan Chadwick and the monument where half of the ashes of Eastern philosopher Alan Watts had been scattered. In the Zendo Garden farm, where Johnson had labored for over 30 years, she and her gardening mentor Harry Roberts had also planted a little Cryptomeria japonica redwood, a taprooting member of the redwood tree family from Japan. The seeds of this exotic variety were gifts that the Japanese organic farmer and author of the One Straw Revolution, Masanobu Fukuoka, had promised to send across the Pacific during his prior visit to the garden in the 1970s. On his grand lecture tour to UC Berkeley, UC Los Angeles, and campuses and farms in New York City and Boston, Fukuoka had foreseen these Cryptomia trees from Koji National Preserve could replace the shallow-rooted native redwoods in California. He awaited with reverent anticipation that in 20 years, these young sprouts from Japan would mature, reroot, and stabilize the desertified soil along the Green Gulch hillside. For these past 30 years, Johnson had thrived on the spiritual and agricultural nourishment that her organic and Zen teachers had planted there. And she long dreamed of the day taking cuttings from these Japanese redwood trees to grow a stronger grove on the slope. But like the garden and trees at Green Gulch that had put down their own roots as spiritual, political, east-west, and global local synergies, she had grown her own transpacific Dharma path of self and planetary care. She had decided to restore the eroded soil of Green Gulch with native California plants. Even more so than Chadwick, who could be willfully excessive and transgressive at times with his with his elite British diasporic life. She worked the tantric beatitude of organic gardening toward and engaged everydayness of Zen realization in American sight. In this respect, Wendy Johnson's gardening at the gardening at the Dragon's Gate can be read as a Zen manifestation of Hesiod's The Works and Days and Thoreau's Walden. She had created from the ashes of her predecessors a lasting pragmatic embodiment and ecological pedagogy, a beautiful synthesis and organic rebirth of a socially engaged and meditative Zen unity that, in fact, anticipated the food activism of Alice Water and the organic mindfulness living works of the many bodhisattvas to come, as we will discuss perhaps in the future. So this is my conclusion, and I want to thank all of you who's listening online and also in person. Thank you. Hello. I hope that was okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. Wendy Johnson. Hmm. Yes. Hmm. Yes. Thank you. Am I still echoing? Uh. Okay. So I'll be try to be very short. I think other than the few points that you mentioned, well, basically, I really see Wendy Johnson in the tradition of American, classical American nature writers. In a way, they're going away into the wilderness or, finding new territories for spiritual renewal. And because of that, there's the traveling or escape part. But they are also trying to find or rebuild a new paradise or a new home for themselves through, bringing attention to every detail of everyday life. And then I think what's most important to me through, or the point that I want to make through Wendy Johnson is like Thoreau, she believes that working or Georgic labor is very important part of spiritual renewal, which, usually people see spiritual or labor as different. She was trying to bring that part together. And another connection with Thoreau is also that both she and Thoreau are very involved in politics, and then they have their own special form of being engaged in politics, basically through building a new world or providing a different alternative modes of life. So I think that's my short response to Scott's question. Okay. 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 Hi. Yeah, nice to meet you. Sorry I can't see you. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh. She is originally from Connecticut, and during college, she went to study and pursued her degree in Israel in comparative religion. Born, as one of the baby boomers, I would say she's also tired of what's going on in the U.S., like consumerism and war, and also colonial expansion. So she was trying to find a way out of that. And then that was really interesting because in Israel, she was exposed to yoga and then also Buddhism. And then that's where she learned about Zen Buddhism and then also meditation. So her teacher there um, kind of, in a way, inspire her to question what her life means, as American who's running away from what's going on in the world. So that encouraged her to return to California, where she first joined the San Francisco Zen Center at Tasahara and become a gardener. And she has been a head gardener of the Green Gulch, which is a part of the San Francisco Zen Center, for over 30 years. And in this book that I talk about, it's basically, in a way, memoir and nature writing of her work. Thank you. And you can go visit her garden if you are in San Francisco. It's very close to the Bay Area. Hi. Uh-huh. I would, yeah. I think there are many. She and some of her friends started this farm to table movement in northern in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, and but there are also many people who contributed to this movement. So I would say she's one of the important figures, but she's also important and unique in her own sense because she unlike the others that she's working with, she is known for her. She's also a Zen master, so she practices and teaches Zen Buddhism. So I think for me, her organic gardening method has is greatly influenced by Zen Buddhism, and then she tried to practice that, and then bring and share like care for other people. No. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh, uh, Hmm. Alan Chadwick. Yeah. So basically, in my book, it's a really long chapter. I begin with Alan Chadwick, which I first show in the PowerPoint slides, and he is a British gardener who came to California, basically invited by UC Santa Cruz to work as a campus gardener there. So he is basically the one of the important gardening teachers of them of Wendy Johnson. So that's why, in a way, Wendy Johnson and her people and her allies and team try to nurture Alan Chadwick when he is dying. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Please stay in touch, and I appreciate all of your comments and time. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Bye. Good night. Bye.